Okay, thank you very much, Heather. Okay, as Heather mentioned, this is part of a webinar series. My name is Jeff Stone. I'm the support director for Merit Solutions for our ongoing AX clients. I'm not a professional presenter by any means, but we've been learning a lot lately. I did something like this at UG in the fall, and we decided to break it into these sessions. We've hit on a few of them so far. You can see, as she mentioned, there's schedules online. We are going to combine 5 and 6 into really 7 and 8 a little bit today as well. Finish up through May, I guess it goes. Here are the 10 building blocks we established in the other previous sessions. And we've basically said that you really want all of these to be assessed when you're looking at your environment as a whole, whether you're the end user that's working with your partner to get help on these items. You're going to have strengths and weaknesses in each of them, but really it is important, and any one of these can kind of cripple your implementation if you don't have it right. So we talked about some technical assessments and more business transformation, functional things to start. Just a reminder, I will ask if you have anything you want to hear more about, go ahead and use the chat functions, post questions and comments, and at the end we should have some time to collect those and go through them a little bit further. I did want to start with one thing that came up last time, which is a lot of these are related. So that was around, accessibility training, but it's also a performance maintenance type of thing. And we had asked about how you can configure, how can you document your configurations? And there's not a lot of, easy ways to do so, but I did remember, and we found a tool that I could share with anybody. But the idea is that you could run a SQL script to capture a starting point of all of your information that you have. So Dynamics AX is good that every table is categorized as which type of table it is. So if you want to look at all of your parameter tables, we've built a script that will spit out something like this that'll say, okay, your asset parameters table, here's the values of everything. And when you see multiple rows, it's probably because there's multiple companies. But this is, we'll say, somewhat meaningless. You can tell true, false, or what some of these values are in all these tables. There's hundreds of these tables. But where it becomes valuable is if you do this at the time before you go live, you've just finished your UATs and everybody says the system looks great, what you can do is you can compare it. You can run it again later on if you have to manually configure some things as you move code to production or a release, or even if the problem comes up later and you want to see if something happened. And then with any type of kind of comparison text tool, you could have your baseline, take your new one, run a comparison, and then this is just a freeware I found, but basically it'll highlight, okay, you've got something different in your customer parameters or something different in your asset parameters. Some of these would make sense. Personalization stuff is going to change instance to instance, but so this is a tool that we've used. So getting the starting point is really the challenge, and I can provide that maybe offline if anybody wants it via email. But we have used this, and it's along with screenshots of the configurations and locking it down. This is a tool we found to be pretty helpful in seeing if something has changed along the way. Okay, so let's get into a little bit more of the true topic today, which was around performance and maintenance. As you can see here, this is just illustrating that you can have a perfectly done system by Microsoft themselves coming in and configuring everything you need. You start up, but if you're not taking care of it, if you're not keeping an eye on it, eventually you will have frustrated users and failures occurring. The most recent example I have of this, and of course it makes it all the way up to the president of our organization from the president of some other organization that says, hey, you guys did AX for us and it's a mess. Why, what's going on? What's wrong with performance? And this is just, he hears it from one person, we hears it from one person, and we start to talk and we start to look at things and we're seeing that everything looks great. It turns out there's one user that prints checks, and her check run was taking like an hour and a half to do however many, 100 checks. And we're looking at it a little bit more, and we're like, man, it looks like everything's fine with the processes. We're printing it to screen. It's happening immediately, and all these different things that we're looking at. And all it was something silly. It's her this is an Azure-based hosted solution, and the network printer she was using was not redirecting the right way technically. So it was always going through her local connection, and nobody said anything. Somehow it festered to the point where it was taking, it became such a frustration that it rose up, and then it became something that the president of the company is dealing with, and we got it resolved in an hour. But so kind of one of my next slides will say perception is reality around performance. The big message, though, is don't live with it, especially if you're early on in implementation. It's not going to get better by itself. It's going to get worse most likely as you keep adding data, as you keep adding users. So if you're not already bugging your partner about something that you don't feel is acceptable, that's what we suggest. And we're the partner that's getting bugged, so we still suggest that. Microsoft will even tell you that when you start off, AX is configured about 80% of the way there with the proper indexes. And every implementation is a little bit different. We have some clients that do tens of thousands of sales lines every day, and we had to go in and make sure that their sales line tables and some of their item SKUs and things like that, where they have thousands of SKUs, that they had some special indexes in place because they were really pushing on the system in that aspect differently than maybe other people. And we have some that do production processing with hundreds of routes on their operations. And again, so every business is a little bit different, and there's going to be areas where you're going to want to put a little attention in and make sure that you're working with your partner to get the right performance optimizations in place. So what I'm going to do the rest of this session is I'll talk about different techniques we've used in different situations. Adding one of those techniques could be a whole 30-minute webinar, so I'll have some links at the end where you can look at them yourselves and probably find YouTube videos of how to do it, or give us a call. We can show you at any time. But let's talk about what tools are out there and what you would use. All right, so here's my Will Ferrell picture. First of all, if you are here because your system is not performing as you expect it to, that's definitely the most common complaint we hear. With we've been doing more where we have come in to help with other AX implementations that we didn't implement, or even ones that we have. It's definitely the most common complaint out there. The thing that makes it difficult is knowing what really is slow or what is poor performance. And without having some baselines in place that you can compare to, you're just into a black hole of one person's opinion versus another. And it's really, that's where the real challenge is trying to confirm with people, well, what is slow, what do you consider slow. And we have people that have 5 sessions open at the same time on their laptop over a VPN connection, running the client without a Citrix server, and just complaining that something's slow. And yes, that it is going to be slow if you're killing the system. There's things though where it's more of a time bomb, we'll call it. So we've seen where forms will start to work fine and over time get worse and worse, and that's really an indicator that an index is incorrect or it needs to be regenerated, which we'll talk about in a little bit on the SQL side. But there also could be other more obscure things. We found one case where one custom form or one custom field was put on a form, and it probably took weeks or even months after that change was made where that form was opening slower and slower for everybody. And the problem was that there's one field on that, or one attribute on that field that was basically saying we want to do like a full cache of this data every time. So basically, whenever it was opening this form, it was just ignoring the true caching features it should have, and just taking longer and longer to the point where it was taking 5 minutes for a single form to open, or even timing out at times. So there's things that are not. That's kind of my no easy button. It's not always going to be okay. Add an index. There's a lot of other things that can cause performance to be subpar. I will say to start, don't forget about the silly, obvious things. Is this only occurring for one user? If you have somebody connect directly to the AOS server and try the same task, or even that same user, does it happen there? Can you rule out their machine or the network versus the AX process itself or the SQL server itself? So that's a big one, and we have found many times that it is a network latency issue or something around that user's client version not being correct. So that's kind of the troubleshooting 101. Identify if it's a pattern and try to hone in on exactly where and when the problem's occurring. Let's see. When does it occur as far as time of day? Is it always at the same time? Perhaps there's something else running at the same time, a large SQL batch. And that's one of the things that the tracing cockpit and specifically the DynPerf tools, which I'll have links for at the end, those can be very helpful to determine what else is going on at the same time. And I'll give you an example of this. We had a client that was doing credit card processing, and if this was in an earlier version of 2012, where if the credit card processing failed for whatever reason, the way that it was rolling back the transaction, basically it's a chicken and an egg scenario for AX. Do you charge your credit card processor before you post an invoice or post a payment, or do you do the opposite? And for whatever reason, Microsoft has determined that they will charge first and then post. So potentially, if something goes wrong, there could be a charge to a credit card even without a posted payment. And that was just, they are expecting to use their rollback logic, if you will. And I fought with them on this time and again, but they said it's by design. In any case, we were seeing where this was happening. Our clients were getting charged even though things were not posting. And how did we go about figuring out what was going on? Well, first we did a tracing cockpit where we were turning on tracing from within the application for that user as she would go and post a batch of payments. And it took a while, but we finally, were able to capture one. Of course, it's an intermittent issue. So we capture something and we send it over to Microsoft. They're looking at the logs and they do see that there's like a blocking lock. So something else is occurring at the same time, and then it basically was timing out. But then what? What's occurring at that same time? How do you figure it out? So that's where the DynPerf tool has even better features where you can see, what else is occurring at the same time. So we were able to, by having that in place with some of the logging turned on, the database logging that was captured, we can compare the timing of the events and say, you know what, there was a trial balance being run at the same time, and they looked at the code a little further. The trial balance is what was locking things incorrectly, wasn't allowing other things to happen. Long story short, there's a patch in place, and that was how we came to resolve that one by using those two tools. But definitely not an easy button. This went on for weeks trying to figure it out, and even with a level 1 escalated 24/7 issue, it is not always an easy thing to solve. Okay, going back to having baselines in place. This is something we call our drone testing. We have a set of SQL statements that we can run, and they are performed through the AOT, so it's very much as if you were doing anything else interacting with the database through AX. And all it's doing is it's creating kind of dummy tables, inserting into them, deleting from them. But you get a baseline, and I know this is small, but basically the left side is a physical production environment, one of our clients that does not complain about performance. And you can see things like inserting 10,000 records took 4, these are milliseconds, basically 5 seconds, or whatever this is. Inserting 50,000 records might have taken 24 seconds. By comparison, if we run these same scripts against, this was a virtual environment for another client where they were kind of neutral, but then these were some environments that we had complaints about, a hosted environment. I don't think this was on Azure, but basically they were complaining about performance. Or this, I think this third one was Azure, but it was on the lowest level. It was a test environment. We kind of knew that this would be unacceptable. But you can see just the type of environment with very similar clients and similar data sets. These may have even been demo environments. I'm trying to remember, but just by the architecture, things like going from 50,000 records inserted in 24 seconds to 49 seconds or 45, that's twice the time, and some of these are even more substantial, 3 times the time for certain transactions, just based on your hardware and or maybe some other SQL configurations in here. But so that's where I wanted to make a point of, is you have to know what's good to know what's bad. So if you don't have some type of baselines in place, that would be step 1. A couple other things around SQL Server, best practices. These are somewhat obvious, but we do run into clients that don't have the production database on its own server. They're sharing it with tests and other environments, or they don't have the database and the log on 2 different drives. These are all noted in, there's a best practices document from Microsoft, but just a couple obvious ones. If you're wanting to talk to your partner, there are certain trace flags that get set. I'm not going to go too far into that, but beyond SQL Server, you want some other best practices. If you have a reporting database like cubes or anything else, that's obviously where you want people to be doing their analysis as much as possible, not hitting the production database. you want to know when your database backups are running, have a maintenance window in place so that people they know not to work Sunday night at 2 in the morning and expect things to be flying the same way they would other times. Let's see, a couple other things, making sure you're using your AOS servers as batch processors, and if you can afford it, have even dedicated servers just for that process to offline things from user machines. There's a couple other things with SQL Server, like there's ways you can set up clustering so that things we've seen where somebody thought they were doing a good job by having a cluster in place where they basically had a real-time replication to their secondary SQL Server. The problem was that that secondary machine was not high quality, and you end up having a lag on your, we'll say, primary if those two are not equally strong, if you will. Similarly, we've had people that thought they had their load balancing set up with their AOSs correctly, but maybe it really wasn't doing it as they expected to. So a couple other best practices there that are all noted in the Microsoft document I'll show at the end. Kind of moving, these will overlap quite a bit, but moving to maintenance a little bit more than just performance. This is my picture of the 1970 John Deere tractor down the street from me that is in mint condition. And I think about that because I can't even keep my 3-year lawnmower from having duct tape and having to pull the thing 100 times to get it started. But it's kind of the, if you care about it, if you have a $200,000 ERP system that you should care about, then with proper maintenance you could be in good shape for a long time. I talked a lot about these already. There's the different areas that you need to be looking at. The clients is a big one. With if you're not using remote desktop services or some other terminal servers, that becomes a whole other maintenance nightmare to keep local clients up to date and to push out updates and to worry if their Windows updates are going to cause a problem, or making sure things are synced together, or having DLLs for your third parties. So I mean, it's just something that if you haven't talked about, you need to make sure that you have procedures in place for. This kind of goes in line with object change management and some of the other topics we'll talk about later. But it's local client machines is the first area that you need to have a strategy in place for. The servers, what we usually do is we do not have Windows updates going on any of our production servers. We will only push those through after some substantial testing in a dev or test environment. We also have kind of restart strategies, especially with the SQL Server. I think on average with a new implementation, we're telling folks that we should try to do a restart of all the virtual machines, and especially SQL Server, about every 4 to 6 weeks, just to clear the memory and cache as much as possible. SQL Server, you want to have your logs being shrunk or purged regularly. So basically, as part of your maintenance, SQL Server maintenance, what am I looking for? The setups that you have where you're setting up your index refreshes and your, I'll show that on the next slide. What else? As far as the application itself, again, patching strategy, updates coming out pretty frequently. We have kind of got into a groove with our clients that about once or twice a year we'll tackle a large CU unless they're really needing something else that's fixed in a new release. We don't want to be bleeding edge, but most of our clients are wanting to stay current, which is good. And backup plans, I'm not going to talk about that too much right now, but basically if you don't have backups of your SQL Server, if it's not real time, then hourly is basically what's advised. Nightly, or at least upon each release, is what we try to get a backup for the virtual machines as well, just in case there's anything that's been configured there. This is just more from Microsoft, some of the things you want in your maintenance plan, defragmenting indexes, updating statistics. This last one is very oversimplified. Basically, you can use IDMF to keep the size of production small. You can delete or archive data. That's a whole nother webinar for that. But we have had some success. If you think about log files, for example, if you're running an alert every minute of the day, or a workflow process, or an email batch, some of those things are just running every minute. That's 1,300 executions a day, which is I think 40,000 a month, you can get into hundreds of thousands pretty quickly of rows in these tables that are, for the most sake, unnecessary, garbage. If something's broken with those, you're going to know in a day or two. So we try to put some things in place, at least on some of the logging tables, to purge every few months. The big tool that we're taking advantage of more, hopefully you and your partners are looking at it if you haven't already, is LCS. There are some really good things, whether you're in Azure. If you're in Azure, it makes it simple. You just kind of point it to your environment. But even if you're not, you can set up against a on-premise installation to connect into your implementation, and you can get some really good things beyond just the event logs and other types of health, CPU, memory that's happening on machines. These will actually look in AX. So if you have a batch job fail in AX, that's not necessarily going to show up on any Microsoft System Center dashboards of, hey, where's the health of my servers? But this actually will look in. It'll tell you, hey, you have a number sequence that's about to be exceeded, or you have things specific to AX. So this is a very good tool we're using more and more, and with most clients, this is something that you and your partner can kind of share and view it together. All right, a few more minutes on some kind of other, I'll lump it under maintenance, just a couple other best practices we try to stress. Making sure you have updated documentation. So I'll talk about this probably in every webinar, but if you don't have a picture of what your servers and interfaces even look like today, and that you can be updating when you do have releases, and that you can note the maintenance schedules of those objects, that's again a step one. The last two sessions of this kind of webinar series that I'm going to go through are what we call our WISE strategy of how we work through a troubled implementation and go through kind of all the things we talked about, and where do you even start if you're just in a mess. So a lot of that is around getting yourself organized, knowing when backups are running, when cubes are being refreshed, what jobs are doing it, how do you pause them, how do you, what should you be on the lookout for. Part of this also is around your custom code and just making sure that you have the processes in place for code migration. We've worked with clients that will not let Merit touch the production environment. They have their own code people that have to move both code to production. But if that one person isn't there, they're stuck, and if things aren't documented. So, hopefully you have yourselves covered with how you're going to react when you need a emergency change request. But even if it's not an emergency, you don't want to get in the position where you have one super developer that's your only person that can help you out. So either relying on your partner or at least having some documentation is huge on that. All right, so we're just about at time. Like I said, any of these tools that you're seeing here, and there's there's many others. These ones we talked about a little bit. There's a whole performance benchmarks SDK if you want to try to do some live testing and see what your times are. SCOM is more for your typically for the infrastructure itself, but they do have a monitoring pack that goes into AX and does a lot of what the LCS tool is doing that I showed. And Azure Operations Management Suite also, these are kind of blending as the hosted solution becomes more prominent. And I'm sure with AX7 it's all going to be done through those tools. But those are links. This should be sent out. I think, like I said, any of those we could talk for hours on, but I'm definitely open to any questions we have right now. And if there's any certain ones that you want to hear more about, we could even do something offline with those.
Sure, great. So I have been watching the questions post, and I don't see anything that's posted now. I did post in the chat myself. I love that picture with Will Ferrell about making sure that you check out the person you marry by giving them slow internet. That was pretty good. All right, let's see. Are there any questions? Anybody want to raise their hand? I'll gladly unmute you if you'd wish to ask it as opposed to posting it in the dashboard. And I did mention in the beginning of the call that this is being recorded and that each of you will get a copy of the presentation deck and the recording, and it'll get emailed right directly to you. So if you get revisiting this, and you have a question, you can certainly always reach out to Jeff at that time, or you can even post it in the content library so that others can see it in the future when they pull up the recording. All right, I don't see anything, so I guess we'll assume that there are no questions for today. So with that said, I guess I'll just thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. I love this series. I look forward to the last one that we have that's coming up. I think it's in April, and sometime in April, right?
Correct.
Yep. All right, so we hope to see all of you out there. And then remember, if you had registered for the March 29th one and you did not for the April, please go out and register for the April one, because the March 29th was just canceled. I just sent out notices to everybody, so you should know. All right, well, thanks again, and we appreciate it. And until April, right, Jeff?
Sounds good.
All right,
Thanks, Heather.
take care. Yep, thanks.